Hello, everybody. Welcome to the July edition of Dinner with the Devs, a game music edition. I'm Dwayne Waite, Jr., part of the Schell Games marketing team. I am thrilled for this conversation. We have some awesome guests here, and yeah, let's get started. So, before we do, just some housekeeping items. If you have any questions, we have an awesome live chat moderator. Adam is there for us. So, if you have any questions, please toss it into the YouTube live chat, or if you're following the video in the Discord, make sure you put your question in the Dinner with the Devs channel for the Discord, and Adam will be sure to put your comments in our spreadsheet, and we'll be sure to answer your questions. So, before I introduce our panel, our question that I'm going to ask them, and I want you guys to consider and to put your answers in the live chat so we could talk about it. The whole hour or so is about game music. So, tell us about some game music that continues to inspire, delight, or energize you. There's all types of games out there and music associated with it. So please tell us your favorites. Tell us the ones you hate, so we're able to talk about everything in between. So let's meet our lovely panel. We'll start with Frank. Frank, what's up?
What's going on? I'm Frank Lubsey. I'm the audio manager at Schell Games, and I serve as the audio director on I Expect You to Die Too. And I'm pleased to meet everybody. Pleased to talk with everybody today.
Good stuff. Julian?
Hi there, I'm Julian Korzeniowsky. I was a sound designer on I Expect You to Die and I Expect You to Die Too, and do a bunch of other stuff here too.
Good stuff. Thank you for joining us, Julian. Dave.
Hi, I'm Dave Bennett. I'm a senior game designer at the studio, and I was the project director for Until You Fall.
And Jared.
Hi, everybody. I'm Jared Mason. I'm a narrative designer here at Schell Games. I helped write I wrote the lyrics and the original music for The Spy and the Liar, the theme song to I Expect You to Die Too, and work closely with sound design on music for storytelling purposes on various games.
Yes, and thank you, Jared, for bringing that up. So throughout this conversation, we're not just talking about game music, but we'll also be talking about sound design in general, game audio in general, so we can try to take generalization, or not generalizations, but topics throughout all of those different subjects. So if anybody has a question about that umbrella of game audio, sound design, game music, please feel free to toss it in the chat for us to discuss it. So first, how did you guys get to where you are now from? I'll start with you, Frank, since we introduced you first. How did you get to where you are now as a game audio manager? So
Okay.
A little bit about your path.
Yeah, absolutely. So I was always a gamer growing up, just from a young age, and I started with the Nintendo, so that was my system, and I always just paid attention to like the music and games, and I still to this day I love just chip tune music. And then in high school I read a book that was about just about game audio, and I was like, oh yeah, I never thought that there's actually people that are writing music and putting it into the games and making sounds. So I actually did the whole business route. That was like my prior life. And then I just could not get music and sound and games out of my system. So I'd always kept up music. I'd done music since 4th grade. And I eventually started taking some classes online about how to implement basically music and sound into games. And then I started doing game jams, doing local game jams. At the local college, I participated in a game creation society and started putting sounds in the games for them, which led me to doing a bunch of freelance work. And then eventually Schell Games reached out to me and was able to transition into Schell Games. And I've been with Schell Games for, I guess, two years now. So it's been definitely been a fun and fulfilling career choice.
Man, it's been 2 years already. Man, that's
2 years.
That's pretty wild.
Yeah.
Yeah, time flies. Well, what about you, Julian? How did you get to where you are about creating music, and from where you were to now creating some of the music with I Expect You Die and I Expect You Die Too?
Sure. So music, I've always been music has been my thing since I was a kid. I grew up in New York and went to LaGuardia Arts High School, which is like the famed school, and I was like a cello player and all this kind of stuff. And at the time, I actually was like, man, I'm going to be a classical composer. That's my thing. All 4 people in the world that are classical composers, I'm going to be one of them. So I went to college at a conservatory in Boston, studying classical composition. And by the time I got out of there, it's just a personal thing. I realized, man, maybe this isn't for me. Maybe I should kind of want to transition into games. I've always been into games. So I ended up going to the Entertainment Technology Center at Carnegie Mellon, which Schell Games has a really good relationship with, and kind of transitioned into Schell Games through there, and have mostly gone into more of the sound design route, even though I still do composition. Like Frank and I composed a bunch of stuff on I Expect You to Die too.
Very cool. Well, thank you for sharing that, Julie. And again, panel, if you want to jump on and then ask questions of each other. I know even though we're in the studio, sometimes we don't really get a chance to ask each other about what we're doing. So please don't hesitate to ask. Dave, I know we brought you on because of your role with Until You Fall and helping helping direct your vision with how the music could be within the game. But for those who haven't watched those Dinner with the Devs about Until You Fall, please give us a little bit about your background and how you got to where you are.
Sure. I mean, unsurprising to anyone, it's like I didn't actually know what I wanted to do growing up. So at first, I thought I wanted to make films for a living, and so I was actually like, okay, I'm gonna learn how to edit films, like maybe do documentaries. That'd be cool. Then by the time I went to undergrad, I was like, no, I don't think doing this is actually viable. I'm going to do something sensible, like go to business school and learn how to build business applications. So I got an information systems degree. And turns out by my senior year of undergrad, I had a crisis of faith, realizing that I didn't want to spend my life managing databases and building applications for businesses. So I took kind of the skills I had for programming and kind of bent that kind of my last year of undergrad towards building a portfolio to actually apply to the Entertainment Technology Center that Julian already brought up. And so using that, got into there and kind of learned more about how to be a gameplay programmer. And eventually kind of going from there, applied to Schell Games as a gameplay programmer, at which point I immediately stopped programming and started writing scripts for Puzzle Clubhouse and started doing a lot of game design tasks. And so basically, yeah, I'd done all this thing. And by that time, I'd realized what game design was, and I really enjoyed it. And so I'd kind of officially transitioned over from gameplay programmer to game designer in November of 2012, I think. That sounds about right. And I've been there ever since. So, God, it's been almost 9 years, hasn't it?
Jeez.
Oh, that's terrifying. But yeah, so since that time, I've been on a variety of projects across the different things, as a designer, as a design director, as a project director. And so my responsibilities in each of those projects, are as varied as the projects themselves. So again, like it was one of those things where I had no idea that I was going to be doing this kind of thing, but I'm super stoked about where I ended up.
Yeah, good deal. And as we go throughout this conversation, we're going to go a little bit more into detail about your role as project director in Until You Fall. So I'll ask you some questions about how you and your art director really tried to use game music to help that game. Jared, your background, or at least your role here, is interesting because with writing lyrics, with your background in narrative, design, I'd love to hear about how you kind of made that journey to where you're here today.
Yeah, absolutely. So the whole writing lyrics thing, right, is something that I've always been interested in, right? Because writing lyrics is a form of poetry, right? And it is an art form in and of itself, different from poetry, because you also have all of these other elements, like the musicality and the instrumentation and the melody, all of that like coming together as well, right? So when I was working on getting a degree in creative writing, I was also in multiple bands. I was writing songs nonstop. I can remember sitting in church, and instead of listening to the sermon, I was just like writing down things that like the pastor was saying, and then like putting it to song. And by the time like a church service was over, I was like, all right, I got a new song. And so I was like writing like a couple songs a week, right? And the problem is that I play no instruments, right? I have no musical talent like whatsoever. I think even like my singing is a little suspect. So, you know, my family was really talented musically, so we grew up kind of like writing songs together and, you know, just putting together music. And I've always been, I'm such a huge fan of people who can do clever lyrics. Like when I hear a clever lyric, it takes me to another world, right? Like I think of, I think some of my favorite lyricists, like Brandon Boyd of Incubus or like Matt Thiessen of like Reliant K, when they can like turn a phrase and like make you really think about a lyric and like what it means, and you're going several layers deep, right? And like I think of like Lil RZA and like some of the stuff that like Wu-Tang has put together in the past. And like sometimes when I like, especially hip hop has such an amazing like history of just cleverness, right? And like this lyric rhymes, but then it also means this, and it's got this layer, this historical reference, right? And like it's an art form in and of itself. All this to say that when I was working on the lyrics for the I Expect You to Die 1 and 2 theme songs, like it was a dream come true. It was like, oh man, we have an opportunity here to make something that is just even scratches the surface of some of those just pioneers of lyrical brilliance.
Oh, very cool. So all of you guys are coming from, you know, really different areas. So the fact that you guys are able to work together on some really cool things at the studio is very fascinating. So whenever you're looking at this is for the group, so feel free for anybody who wants to jump in on this. Whenever you're looking at, you know, game design and game music or you know, sound design, you know, how do you guys think that you know, interacts, like whether in the studio or just your own, you know, personal philosophies?
I mean, I got some stuff for sure, unless anyone else wants to go. So kind of one of the things that I like to say is that I guess in terms of design, we talk a lot about like visual design or something, kind of leading the player to understanding how to play the game and how to interact with the world and stuff like that. And I think that what sound does, and music especially, kind of leads the player to understand how to emotionally connect with the world. So I guess just in the sense that it's not an explicit, like, this is the emotion that we're trying to get across, but it just kind of helps you guide towards that. And I think, like, especially music, but generally in design too, like, you're trying to get across things like the weight of something, the size of something, the, you know, how scary a character can be, any of that kind of stuff, just helping out with the emotional connection of the game.
Yeah, and I mean, I think that's a great point, because for Until You Fall, like the entire focus of the music and basically the sound design in general was all about making you feel powerful. And as a game about hitting dudes with swords, we wanted everything to kind of lead you into that and want to encourage that behavior. And so a big part of the music that we kind of decided upon was like, okay, it needs to be something that has, like, you know, a really driving beat or driving rhythm. Basically, again, like, it's the term I liked was preparing for violence almost. It's kind of like, okay, this is the thing where it's like, all right, I'm going to get lost in the flow and be pushed forward into combat and really just kind of like lose myself in the rhythm, in just the, you know, the really kinetic feeling of the game. And so that was very much an intentional choice. And it wasn't agonizing, but we did spend a lot of time talking about, like, hey, what is the right genre of music here?
Yeah, and I agree. And I guess what I add to that as well is, particularly with like the narrative portion of design, I think music particularly can kind of help establish just the setting, like the place and the location. Like when you hear certain songs, it could take you to a certain period of time instantly. That can either reinforce the visuals, or, for example, if, you know, whatever, if you can't communicate with visuals, like, you can, a lot of things you can communicate with music. So I think just in help determining, like, the setting of where something is taking place, or just the locale, music can definitely play a part with helping with that as well.
Yeah, 100% agree with Frank. Right. I think back on games like Limbo, where if Limbo were by itself just this really kind of creepy, otherworldly game, it would still be great. But it is absolutely brought to another level by the music that was created for it. And that music makes you think back on that game, right? Like it brings you back to certain portions of it because of how it matches the gameplay. We talk a lot at Schell Games about player fantasy, and player fantasy kind of being the foundation of the thing that we build everything else on for when we're making a game, right? And I feel like music is at that foundational level, right? Like it's trying to hit that player fantasy. And like even when you're building like the world and the story, like that can affect it. But at the end of the day, player fantasy and music are connected in such a way that they cannot be taken apart.
Yeah, I mean, if you're a badass magical knight, what are you listening to? Like, what is the soundtrack
Yeah.
to you being a badass knight? If you're a super spy, what is the soundtrack to you being a super spy? Because it is such an important part of just kind of getting you in, teleporting you into the role almost. It's because again, like if we have this clear idea of who we want you to be or what we want you to feel, the audio is such an important tool to get you there.
See, that's so funny. And in my head, I don't know why. Like for like if I'm like a magical rune knight in Until You Fall, I still think that I have a huge sword on my side, a big long heavy leather cape, but then I still have like a mixed tape soundtrack from like Guardians in the Galaxy. So I have to like move my giant cape around to be able to switch and to fast forward and things like that.
You bring up Guardians of the Galaxy. It's such a perfect example of what we're talking about too, right? Because can you imagine Guardians of the Galaxy with a very serious, like adventure kind of like John Williams-esque soundtrack? Like it would still be great, but the fact that it has this pop culture soundtrack completely changes the movie, right?
Yeah.
Take apart that it's also integrated into the story, which is phenomenal, right? But even if it wasn't integrated into the story and it had it was completely separate, it changes the entire tone of the movie, like not just the atmosphere musically, but how the viewer experiences that movie. And it's the same thing for games.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, the soundtracks for each one is just so fun. So it's good stuff. But I'm like in Rokar with a giant broadsword. Like, hold on, yeah, that's not the right one. Yeah, okay, here we go.
I skipped it too far. Hold on, let me just give me one more.
That's right. It's like, oh, I missed my favorite verse. Okay. So we have a couple questions. Night the Killer, thank you for joining in again. We love seeing you every month. They ask, how do you even start when making a soundtrack for the game? Does the music come first, then the game, or game, then music?
Oh man.
That's a really good question in the context of I Expect You to Die as well, because the answer is it's both. So and the reason for that is the intro song that we talk about, the kind of the one that we're going to showcase, that was song first. That was very much like we knew we wanted to build something around this song, and of course, we knew stylistically what we wanted to go for. There was a lot of pre-production surrounding style and all that kind of stuff. But the song did come first. Visual/gameplay of that area came later. That being said, for our individual level music, game definitely came first. It definitely came, what is the setting we're going to be in? What beats are we trying to hit? We talked about time period, but like, what emotional beats are we trying to hit? All this other type of stuff. And that very much influenced music creation. And especially at least on I Expect You to Die 2, we kind of, at least the way we divided stuff up in terms of the levels was actually into acts. So it's like there's an act 1, act 2, act 3 structure. So, and that would kind of be, you enter a place, something bad happens, resolution, whatever it may be for that particular level. Our music basically followed whatever that act structure in that particular level ended up being.
Yeah, and Until You Fall's case, the gameplay was more solidified at that point. We knew it was a game about hitting dudes with swords. And we had an idea of like kind of the general art style. Was a much more straight fantasy game originally. But we were trying to decide, like, okay, again, kind of like I mentioned earlier, like, what is the soundtrack for being a rune knight? What music will get me into a place where I'm ready for violence, totally lost in the rhythm of battle and combat, and then let me cool down to then do it all over again. And we actually did a lot of discussions about, like, okay, well, we could go with more epic orchestral fantasy. I pitched third wave ska, which has become a meme at this point, because that stuff really, you pick it up. But beyond that, basically looking for things that really drive you forward. And obviously I was viewed about the third wave ska, but some of the stuff that I brought up was like synthwave, and I think it was a Mega Drive track where it's really this kind of dirty, grungy, like, I don't know, just track. I don't remember. I think it's I think the track name is Narc, I think. And we listened to that, and then the director's group kind of had an oh my god moment where we all put our hands on the table and kind of looked at each other. It's like, oh dang, is this what our game should sound like? And so we kind of decided that, and like realized, okay, like we have this cool thing. We looked for examples like Carpenter Brute, other great synthwave artists, for like good examples of like really kind of over the top, push you forward, just get you lost in it type of music. And that ultimately actually informed a lot more about the visuals and style of the game. So what originally started as a very straight fantasy world, we added in the synthwave, which then pushed the weird kind of neon 80s nostalgia pastiche of the thing, which then drove more of the music, which then drove the visuals. And so like that decision of like, okay, let's go with this type of this vibe, this feeling, really informed kind of the rest of the game and kind of what we're going for. And again, like we weren't going for necessarily like 80s, remember the 80s, that's a fun joke, right? We're kind of going for like, remember that game that was on the side of the art on the side of the arcade cabinet? This is what the game actually is and what it feels like. And so kind of like we eventually kind of arrived at that organically, kind of based off of that one decision of like, all right, let's find music that gets you into combat, and this weird electronica stuff with fantasy characters just really gelled together.
Very cool. I just had the question. Where was it? I'll just get to another question for the live chat. David Reischek. I hope David R. I'll say David R. So I'm not butchering your name. When you're composing in house, do you guys have access to a recording studio, or is mostly everything done via sample libraries like East, West, Spitfire, etc.? So I'll even expand on this and say, during the past crazy year, whenever the world was shut down, how did you guys create such wonderful music? And I think Until You Fall was also created. The music was at least finished in during quarantine, if I remember.
I think the soundtrack was. We had the gameplay music all finished ahead of time, and so when when in the before times that was all done, and then we moved. But when we all had to start working from home, it was mostly about figuring out how we were going to release the vinyl and the other kind of releasing the soundtrack on the other services.
That's right. Okay, so we can kind of talk about how that would be finished. Working from home, and then I guess Julian and Frank. How, and even Jared, with your with the writing the lyrics and working with the teams, because I know just being on the emails there is a lot of back and forth about the iteration of the lyrics and how the lyrics dealt with the sound. How did you guys manage to do that out of the studio? So that's a big question, so feel free to take each one bit by bit.
Well, I can I'll talk about at least the process for the intro song, which was definitely a collaborative effort. And I think it started maybe pre-pandemic and then carried over into the pandemic. But basically how it started is that Jared had come up with the lyrics, and his wife had come up with like the chords to support it. So it's basically a demo. I think Jared, I think you recorded like on your was it iPhone or something like that, but it was just literally just kind of bare bones on the piano. And to make a long story short, in the original stages of iteration, We actually contracted with a company called Bay Area Sound, who I think did a wonderful job to kind of bring it to life. But basically a lot of samples were used to basically mock up the song. So there's a lot of trumpet samples, a lot of string samples, drum samples that you'll hear. And so that's kind of what we kind of put forth and went back and forth and iterated on to just get people's opinion on the song. And do we like it? What do we want to tweak? The arrangement. Do we want to make this part, move this part to the C section, or move this part to the verse section, everything like that. Once that was kind of finalized and people could hear it from the mock-up, then we through via Bay Area, we commissioned live musicians to actually record those parts into live parts. And that was all done remotely and actually at different times as well. So Bay Area basically coordinated like amongst the different musicians. And I think a lot of that was LA based. And then we actually, the string section was, I think they were based in Germany, which was done like a couple months later after we already had the original thing. So long story short, we used a mock-up for the large portion of the song. And then once we finalized everything, we commissioned live musicians to record over it. And that was for the intro song. Julian masterminded a lot of the in-game music, so I can let him speak to that, which is a little bit different process.
Sure. Yeah, and it's just to clarify too, is that the intro song probably had this totally different pipeline than the in-game stuff. It was two totally separate worlds. And the way the in-game stuff was definitely a lot scrappier, I would say. So I think actually all of our in-game music was basically composed during the pandemic. I could be wrong, but I think it had hit at that point. I don't know about you, Frank, but for me, I kind of was talking about this before while we were chatting before the show, but all I had was this like tiny USB keyboard, this like 20 key thing, and a copy of Logic and my brain, I guess. But that was kind of, and with that, it was initially using a lot of different sample libraries. I called upon my classical music knowledge. We have one piece that takes place it's the one that's released now in a backstage area. So it's actually a Baroque composition. So I just straight did into Sibelius, which is like a score writing software. That's where I wrote the entire piece of music and then converted that into software instruments. But the fun part is we were actually able to get a couple live musicians to supplement those software instruments as well. A bunch of my friends from conservatory as well, who it's like, hey, like this guy like won an award for guitar. He's a good friend of mine. Come on, like let's bring him on. So we got a really, really fantastic pianist, guitarist, and violinist to help supplement and really bring those like our various pieces to life. So it's a mix. It's definitely a mix of live musicians and software instruments for the in-game music specifically.
Good deal. Go ahead, Dave. Didn't mean to
No, I
interrupt.
mean, Until You Fall was, as electronic music, it was all samples. So it was all composed by Daniel Cohen. There's just a lot of iteration, and actually a lot of the work for the music was just figuring out like what transitions we need. So again, like for the different states of the game. So it's like, okay, how do we go from pre-combat to middle of combat? When we have the kind of upwell of emotion in the middle of combat, how do we transition to that? And Dan did a great job of just, I don't know, finding the tone for it, and really like not only just taking what we liked about the genre, but also kind of like adding our own weird dance flair to it.
Dave, didn't you guys work at some point on some piece of music with a dude from like Under Oath or something like that?
Yes. Yeah, we had I think he wrote the credits music.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. As a big Under Oath fan, when I heard that, I was kind of freaking out a little bit. That was really cool.
Yeah, no, it was awesome to actually work with him, and like kind of it, like we gave him the overall Chris Dudley, I think it's the name.
Yeah.
And we got the overall kind of vibe and tone of what the game was, and then we were able to kind of work with him to figure out like, all right, like let's give us something in this space. And so we kind of had a blow back and forth of like, okay, like the how is this still Under Oath ish style, even though it's not really Under Oath, it's more Chris Dudley, but still it's like it's that vibe. but still also kind of Until You Fall. So yeah, it was super fun to actually get a chance to work with him and put that in the credits and have just a I don't know, something kind of cool and extra in there.
And he was all about it too, if I remember correctly. So
Oh yeah.
yeah, that's pretty sweet. See, speaking of Daniel Cohen, he had a question in the chat, so it's great to have you listen in, Daniel. We appreciate everything that you've done on Until You Fall and all your other accomplishments that you did while you were at the studio. So he asks, on I Expect You to Die, was any of the sound design from fun or interesting Foley? If so, what did you do to make the sound? Any cool techniques or fun items used?
You want to go for it, Frank, or should I take it?
You can take this one.
Sure. So the unfortunate truth is pandemic. So we didn't really get too much Foley work. I know for me personally, I did take a bunch of things in my house. My favorite was really simply filling up a canteen and then using that as like kind of wishy-washy water in a thing, and actually use that a lot for various things, even not water stuff. But a lot of it was definitely sound libraries, stuff like that. Although a lot of the techniques that we used with those sound libraries, I'm really proud of personally too. So I think it worked out.
It's not I Expect You to Die, but fun fact, the sound that is Until You Fall when you try to dash and you cannot dash, goes bam bam, is literally our tech director's voice with processing on top of it. So there's some hot Foley for you. Because it was great because we were trying to talk about what the sound it should make when you can't do what action is, and kind of like, oh, it's a negatory action, it's a it's a burp burp kind of noise. It's like, oh, okay. He took his phone, just went burp burp, and then recorded it, and then I don't even think we re-recorded it. I think we just used that asset, and then I think it's one of our sound designers just took it and just made it pretty. So to this day, now you all know, and won't be able to unhear it.
That's amazing.
Good question, Dan.
Yeah, that was good. Let's see. Speaking more on, so I love these questions. Please, guys, keep it going. Captain Jack asks, was there a time when you completed a soundtrack, or a piece of, we'll say piece of music or piece of audio, but decided to scrap it last minute because you didn't like how it went?
It's a good question. I'm trying to think off the top of my head. I definitely know during the process, both Julian and I think almost with every song, you get to a point where you feel like good about it, and then you kind of question it over and over again. And either you like heavily iterate on it, or you kind of take some time away from it, come back like, oh, it works. I'm trying to think of pieces that outright scrapped. I think I had a couple of pieces from one of the levels where I definitely had a couple pieces from one of the levels where it just wasn't working. Like it was I think it was actually, I don't know if the levels are yet, so I don't want to spoil anything, but I think it was from so there was a jazz, put it this way, there was like a dinner party going on, and it was like a jazz piece, and it was just the mood was off. It was because a lot of times like the design will evolve. So originally you're like, okay, you think this will work, and then a couple iterations in, maybe the design changes, and so something else happens where it was supposed to be like flat throughout the level. Well, now no, this is going to be more exciting. So that old piece that you had didn't take that into account. So now when you play it and things are supposed to be more exciting, it's like, hold on, things are more exciting, but your levels, the music is kind of flat. So you scrap it and move on. So that's definitely, that's definitely happened. And I try not to be too attached to things, because iteration is kind of like the name of the game. So yeah.
Jared, how far do you get with like when you're writing the lyrics? Like I'm trying to think of like how far into the song you would have gotten before you're like, oh, this is just not working, and you just toss it out. Like, I guess like how many revs did you go through, or even like what was it like? Was there 3 versions of the song that existed before we got to the final one?
There were probably a dozen versions of the song. We're going on to the final one. Yeah, like lyric writings, I feel like it's probably a little different. Not having instrumentation expertise, lyrics are cheap, right? So like before I ever presented it to anybody, like before I even brought it to the team, it went through a lot of revisions. And I usually find when I'm writing lyrics that the thing that I find like one, not necessarily the hook, but at least one lyric that I can like, this is a microcosm of the song, right? Like this is something that I can build on, whether it's a certain rhythm to the lyrics and like how it's matching up with the melody in my head, or maybe it's like a rhyme scheme that I'm really digging. That's how it was with the Spy and the Liar, is that I found a rhyme scheme for the verses and I was like, oh man, I'm really digging this rhyme scheme. How do I make everything kind of fold into that, right? And it changed and mutated a little bit, but it was kind of like this foundation that I could build on. And so, yeah, it happens that you throw stuff out, you bring new stuff in, the song mutates and everything. But for me personally, I like to find that one thing that is consistent so I don't feel like I'm starting over every single time.
Good stuff. Let's see. Let's continue. We have a couple more questions. And thank you. Adam just shared a lot of the game soundtrack highlights in the chat. So I promise we will get to those. So if there are any more highlights, please continue to put them in, what you like, what you didn't like. Let's see. Sure. Okay. So Daniel asks again, is there any hope uh, of us working in the studio again anytime soon? Well, we are slowly starting our back to office. Starting this month, just a couple weeks ago, people are slowly trickling in back into the studio. So I know I'm spending some time in the studio, as are others. So depending on people's situations, people are slowly coming in. Some might take a couple weeks from now to come in, but yeah, I mean today the office was pretty buzzing. So Shell Games, we are thrilled to be able to get people back into the office working close in hand at teams, but we also found some efficiencies of working remotely. And so I think some of you guys, if you want to, you guys can talk about your experience working remotely and coming back into the studio. I know Dave, I know you and I enjoy shouting at each other in different levels of the studio, so I'm glad we're able to do that again. Maybe not other people are glad, but I'm sure I'm glad. So
They don't matter.
yeah. So yeah, you guys can share your experience of kind of working remotely and coming back into the office if you guys desire to do so.
Yeah, I mean, again, like the latter half of Until You Fall was all remote, and so in a lot of ways, like it's great because you can focus and get everything done. Like it being in one spot all day, it's uniquely exhausting in a lot of ways. I'm sure Zoom fatigue is something that was coming up a lot. But any sort of video call fatigue over a long course of the day, like especially as a project director, you're just constantly in video calls, so that it just is exhausting in ways that I never could have imagined. But overall though, like what you do get is a nice kind of you're in a comfortable environment. Generally you can focus, you can get a lot of like really good focus work done. I think we found like collaboration can be difficult, but I think to the credit of everyone on the at the studio, we found a lot of really good ways to like use Slack, email, video calls to like try to make up for it. It doesn't exactly you can't really compensate. We have to find ways to compensate for like those casual desk conversations, or like, oh, like even yesterday. So like I've started coming back to the studio more regularly. Like someone saw me walking through the kitchen. I was like, oh, Dave, damn, could you come here and play this for a second? I just want like some unfiltered feedback. That kind of thing just doesn't happen from work from home when everyone's remote. So like those are kind of the trade-offs. So like, I don't know. And having now been back at the office for roughly about 2.5 weeks, 3 weeks, it's still very weird. it's cool in a lot of ways. It's easy to get back into the swing of things, but it's still very strange, especially after spending 18 months in my home office looking at this computer. And it's like, okay, right, I have to physically locomote to different spaces now to talk to people and go to meetings, and like, oh right, that takes time. So I'm constantly just kind of a little bit late to all my meetings now because I forget that there's there's a delay. But yeah, like, I don't know, I'm rambling a little bit, but yeah, like, I don't know, anyone else like any hot takes about their experiences?
Well,
go ahead. Sorry.
Sorry, I was gonna say I agree with you on the Zoom fatigue. I was fatigued with the video meetings. I mean, they're necessary, but it's just like meeting in person to me versus video is a totally different thing, especially with some of like the team bonding or just like the celebrations. Like I'm glad that we did it. They were still fun video wise, but I remember like the early part of I Expected It I Too, we would have just like on Fridays, just like team reviews. It would just be like a fun way to just celebrate like the work that we did. And I miss the in-person part of that. The other thing I miss is the food that we had. The free food is always good. But I'll say I think the thing that was a benefit, I think Julian can attest to this. Dan Cohen, if you remember too as well, the studio for audio people can be very noisy, not in terms of people talking, but just like the ambient noise. So the one thing that I did like is that working remotely is like working on music or working on sound is like I could completely shut out like the outside world, which would allow me to just like get into whatever level that I'm working on and just just really immerse myself in it. So that is the one, which was a major benefit of working from home on the audio side that I experienced.
Yeah, I mean, my hot take to go off of Frank is I actually really, really enjoyed working remotely because along with being in a quiet space, being able to kind of do my own thing, I can also blast sound. So I can hear stuff as loud as I want without disrupting anyone else, which is honestly really important. At least I've learned is really, really, really important. I think the other thing, at least, and this might be a personal thing too, I think my communication improved dramatically, just in the sense that like, I think when I was in the studio, when I would go over and talk to someone, I kind of implicitly thought about the thing I was talking about. So I'd be like, how's the thing? And in my head, it was kind of like, oh, they know what I'm talking about, even though they may not. It may just, and we would just kind of communicate that way without knowing that maybe we were implicitly talking about different things. And when we moved to remote, that got amplified by a lot. So I really had to be very, very specific in what I was talking about and trying to get feedback on and trying to communicate. And honestly, I think all the better for me personally, at least for that. Yeah, so I don't know. I mean, obviously pandemic is terrible. It was really difficult and everything, but I do enjoy the remote work personally.
Good stuff. Let's see. So we have another question. This is for Jared. The illustrious E says, hello all, and hi, Jared. General question. What's something about writing a score for a game that makes it distinct from... Okay, what's something about writing a score for a game that makes it distinct from other mediums? Or what's your favorite thing about making music specifically for games? And I think Julian and Frank and even Dave, if you want to jump in, you guys can answer that.
Yeah. Hi, Lubsey. So I will definitely throw this over to Julian and Frank here in a second. I will just say that when we were putting together the Spy and the Liar theme song, what made it different for games, for especially I Expected to Die, right, is that I think it comes back to that player fantasy. So when you are creating music for other mediums, let's say, for like just for the sake of music, or putting out an album or creating a score for a movie, I think you are trying to make the viewer or the listener feel something, right? With games, you're not just trying to make them feel something, you're also trying to put them somewhere, right? And make them take on a role that you really don't have in movies. So when we were talking about what the song for this The Spy and the Liar, what that is supposed to be and what it was supposed to accomplish, it really came down a lot to, you are a spy in this game, right? You have this fantasy of being a spy, of, you know, disarming traps, of infiltration, of taking on personas that aren't your own. And the music isn't just about like, oh, that feels very spy-like now. The music is about, I need to make you feel like you are a spy, right? It isn't just creating an atmosphere, it's creating an investment, an immersion. And so I think that's the primary difference, is that when you are talking about games, you're talking about interactivity. And that interactivity comes from a place of fantasy first and foremost. And so you really have to match expectations for, I'm not just listening and feeling, I'm also investing and immersing. But yeah, when it comes to the actual soundtrack, I guess Julian and Frank, like, was that something that was on your minds while you were doing this? Like, not just the, like, oh, this is great music, but like how it works with interactivity. I know that we have a system, and this is probably a good space to talk about that system that you created for this.
Yeah, I mean, I'm going to jump on that, because I was going to talk about, right off of that, non-linear versus linear medium. So when you have linear medium, you can get those crescendos, those, like, you know, moments of tension, because it'll always be the same. When you're watching a movie, like, there are always going to be 30 seconds in between the person is, you know, shoots the gun and the person is shot or something like that. In games, that could be a minute, that could be 2 minutes. You could spend 30 minutes in one area. So your music needs to account for the fact that you are, you know, the player can do whatever they want, and you still want to have those dramatic, you know, moments of tension, those, you know, and then moments of coming down as well, and all that kind of stuff. One of the things, at least, that I'm kind of proud of, kind of talking about integration stuff, is we developed on I Expect You to Die 2, I call it a reactive music system. But it's basically just the music will actually react to what the player is doing in some way or another, you know, based on where they are in the game. So it works differently in the different levels, but the basic sense of it is basically there is kind of a timer, and every second and a half, because I think the idea is that a human can't perceive that something is different if there is a second or a second and a half, up to a second and a half difference. So they would perceive it as the exact same piece of music. So every second or second and a half, we're checking, okay, have they hit these various triggers in the game? Have they done this? Have they done that? Have they done this? And then you're able to move kind of very, very nicely through the different pieces of music within one level. So the hopeful, and at least through playtesting and stuff like that, at least within the levels, is people not noticing that there is a difference in the soundtrack necessarily, or feeling like, oh man, I felt the tension here and it went away, but I don't know why, who knows? And the answer may have been that reactive music system was kind of taking you through these levels as you were doing stuff at your own pace as the player. I don't know, Frank, do you want to add anything to that as well?
No, I mean, yeah, that was the main thing for me, was just like the linearity versus non-linearity. I guess the other thing that was a challenge, I would say, is like the mixing. Just with, like, you know, traditional media, you know all the sounds are going to be playing at a certain time, so you can mix it accordingly. So, you know, movies, you know what sound effects can be playing, and you can adjust like the mix between the sound effects and the music volume. But it's like games, you don't really know. You could, you know, the player could set off an explosion, could have leave this machine turned on. So trying to mix that was, especially some of our music was coming from in the scene, so they could turn off the music, turn it back on. So trying to mix that was definitely a whole different beast than what I was used to with just like traditional media.
Yeah, I want to jump in here and say that, I don't know, Julian, you call it the RMS, the reactive music system?
Oh yeah, hell yeah, that's what it's called now.
So the RMS is a narrative designer's dream, right? Because when you are making a game, you're not really making a game, at least from not a narrative perspective. What you're making is an emotional experience, right? And the idea that the score and the music and like that can react to what the player is doing, excuse my dog, that can react to what the player is doing. That takes immersion level from here to here. It puts it through the roof, right? I talked at the beginning of this call about how music augments emotional experiences so heavily. Now you bring interactivity to the music. Holy cow. I can craft emotional experiences in the story and what's happening with the narrative to a much higher degree now. So I hope to see RMS in every project going forward. That's what I think.
And at least to add on to that, like as at least a composer, like my goal is to make Jared's dreams come to life, like straight up. That's kind of what my job is.
Nice. Yeah, I mean, we didn't use RMS. I mean, I guess we were before RMS. So we Until you Fall kind of rolled its own version of that, where basically we had like, because it is non-linear, and we are very much focused on like making you feel awesome and making you feel the appropriate level of excitement or dread or whatever emotion we're trying to get you to feel. We do have like kind of a reactive music system of our own that's not the copyrighted RMS, that based off the number of enemies that are alive, based off of your health, based off of whether you're starting the room or ending the room. Like, when we lead you in, we have the very much more calmer music, which then transitions into the beginning of combat. And then after you kill 2 or 3 of the enemies, or about half the enemies in the room, it then picks up the tempo and becomes this kind of more epic and exciting music. But if you go down to 1 health, the music, you're now on death's door, and it gets more dramatic. And then once you've managed to clear your way through the room, it then kind of transitions to like, okay, calm down, take a breath. And with that kind of like nice, each encounter basically has its own interest curve. And like, Julian, you brought up the cooldown period. Like there's kind of like the, crescendo, cooldown, and then we kind of start over again. And again, for such a roguelite structure where you're doing it over and over again, making sure that you're not always at 11 was super important to us, and super important for the game, because otherwise you would just burn out after like 10 minutes. So yeah.
Good stuff. All right, so I promised those who put their game highlights in the chat that we'll get to it, and so we're coming in a couple of minutes. So let's do that now. So here are a couple of the games, and feel free to comment on them after I read them, and I'm happy to repeat them. So game soundtrack highlights in the chat. I Expect You to Die. Thank you, whoever said that. Ghost of Tsushima, Cuphead, Sonic the Hedgehog, Hollow Knight, Ratchet and Clank, The Last Guardian, Splatoon, Doom Eternal, Nintendo in general, Final Fantasy, Nubo Uematsu, and Hades.
Yeah, I mean, I'm gonna definitely jump in with both Doom Eternal and Hades are definitely like spot on. Like Hades is just freaking great, but Doom Eternal is also like that perfect example of like, hey, it's music that is designed to get you going. It is friggin' death metal that is there to just push you forward, and the way they also have a reactive music system that like increases and decreases the intensity based off of what's happening in the encounter. So those are some really good examples.
Speaking of at least integration for Doom, I'm pretty sure what they do is during normal gameplay or whatever, the mix is that the music is down here, sound effects are up here, you kind of understand what you're doing. When the boss comes, boom, suddenly your music is above your sound effects, and that is the thing. Like, so that's definitely very, very cool.
Yeah, I'll jump in and say that Nobuo Uematsu and Final Fantasy soundtracks, not only are they the soundtracks to many of our childhoods, teenage, and adulthoods, but I fully expect. My wife also, like Julian, studied classical music, right? And she is of the opinion that Nobuo Uematsu's name will go down in history as, maybe not quite as popular as names like Mozart and Beethoven, right? But he will be studied as a composer, right? And I would argue he's probably one of the, if not the most famous video game composer, right? And so video game as a medium and the music that they create, I feel like he is probably at that forefront of legitimacy, right? And providing this credibility to games, because the music that he composes is just, it takes you somewhere, right? And I fully believe that Final Fantasy would not be as popular as it is today if it were not for his soundtracks.
Yeah, I mean, I have to agree. I've been a fan of Final Fantasy for a while, and I mean, that basically that soundtrack brought me into games. That and like Nintendo, I agree with the Nintendo comment, their stuff in general, but Final Fantasy was it for me.
I mean, like friggin' Final Fantasy VII Remake, when you hear Aerith's theme for the first time, I was like brought back. I was like, oh my god, I'm a teenager again. And it's like it was such an emotional hit that I wasn't expecting, and like again, just the power of that music.
Yeah, the fact that there is like a tour, the Distant Worlds concerts, right, where it's just hours of Final Fantasy music. And you also have things like Video Games Live, right, where you take some of the best compositions of video game soundtracks and bring them together. It's games have come into their own as a medium for music composition.
Yeah, I mean, based on that, we talked, or in our, so I share, notes with all of our panels, and it was, I totally missed it. I love the Olympics, and I always try to watch the opening ceremonies, and on the Tokyo opening ceremonies, there was a whole homage to video games, from Final Fantasy to Kingdom Hearts to all sorts of the different games. And to everybody's point, the game audio and game music is becoming just part of just life now, not just like gamers life, which is another term that I disagree with. But it's just, there are certain things of our lives that just, games are really starting to just, be a part of. It's not infiltrating, it's just, interwoven into it. So are there any other, I don't know if you guys saw the opening ceremonies and recognize that music yourselves, but I thought that was really cool. And to all your points that there's certain songs from games that make you feel something. I thought that was a really cool touch from the Olympics.
I agree. It creates this cultural touchstone, right, for everybody. Because I would be willing to bet that they don't do that unless they believe that the majority of viewers can relate to it in some way, right? And I imagine probably a little cultural difference in Japan as opposed to like the rest of the world, but undoubtedly that doesn't happen unless video games have come to the point where that music is recognizable, relatable, and culturally significant.
Good stuff. So we are going to go just a couple minutes over 7 o'clock. There's some great questions, and there's that main question about what type of game music continues to inspire, delight, energize you. So if you're still hanging with us, please feel free to answer that question, and we'll try to get to your comments, and we'll get those or get the comments from the panelists as well. And so before we get to our before we start the show, so we have a piece of music from Until You Fall and a piece of music from I Expect You to Die Too. We're gonna get to that, but before we do, Munis asks, as a game designer without any knowledge of music, how would you approach a sound designer when you need a music for a scene? Like, how much would you get involved? Or I guess how much, or if you don't know much, how little do you need to be involved with that?
Well, as a game designer with no knowledge of music, I mean, again, like the best thing you can do, like it's part of it's also like finding basically common language and like touchstones that you can basically communicate in. And that was definitely like a learning experience for me of like, okay, well, how do I communicate? Like, what are these terms that are being thrown around? And again, going back to Until You Fall, which is the most like my most relevant experience, is like, okay, well, here's all the different things that like I'm finding that fit well, and so let's talk together and let's work together to figure out like what is it about each of these tracks, or what is it about this genre, or what is it about this space that we're exploring together. Like, what is it that we're trying to accomplish, but what is it also we like about it? What are the elements that can you help me dissect the elements? And like working with someone like Julian or Frank like is invaluable there because they actually have the language and the understanding of like, oh, well, actually what you like here is the driving rhythm at this tempo. I'm like, oh, okay, cool. Yeah, totally. That's totally what I liked. And it's, again, like, and feel free to jump in, Julian or Frank. Like, again, like generally what I found works the best when you're working with someone that, just doesn't have the expertise, like whether it's audio, art, like tech, just being curious and being willing to like ask the questions and being, open and honest about the facts. Like, yeah, I don't know squat about this and I want to understand it. So please let's talk about how we can basically really nail down like what's important to us.
Yeah, I mean, I can jump off of that. Like, at least speaking as a audio person that wants like what I would want from a game designer or something. Kind of going off what Dave was saying is a big thing is actually I feel statements. Like, not necessarily saying I think the music should do this, but more so like, oh man, when I listen to this, I feel blank or something. And even if it's not the direction you're going, I feel blank, but I want to feel blank. And then even more so like listen to it with the audio person. And it's like, oh, here at this particular point in time, that's where I feel blank. Because that's when we know, okay, that's the type of thing that isn't working or is working particularly well, or is the thing we want to emulate, stuff like that. The other big thing, at least I would say, is definitely like trust your audio people. So they're hopefully, if they're working with you, they know what they're doing, and they probably know what they're doing better than you as someone who doesn't know. So like if they have certain, and there could be like, there could still be, I guess, vision differentiations and all that kind of stuff. But most likely if you give a piece of feedback, they'll know what they're doing. So don't try to necessarily guide them like to the note of what they need to do, I would say.
Yeah, I want to jump off and reiterate that. I think importantly, no matter who you're working with, whether it's animators or concept artists or audio design, everybody has a great head for designing this game and for development, right? And what you need to do as a designer is not come to those conversations from a place of, I need you to see my vision. You need to come to it with, here's my side of the vision, and hopefully that helps you fulfill your side of the vision, right? Because that collaboration is really where everything shines. If I come to Julian and I say, I want it to sound like this, bop, 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 right? And suddenly he's like, okay, well, I have no creative input here. And that does a couple things, right? Number one, that takes Julian, not to speak for you, but that takes anybody kind of like out of that creative process, right? And so they don't feel that investment, and when you don't have that investment, you're not putting that passion into it anymore. You're like, okay, I'm fulfilling somebody else's vision. You never want that, right? And the second thing is that you are then limiting their expertise. Exactly what Julian talked about, right? Like, you have to trust your other developers that like, okay, if you know game design, then Julian knows audio design. And that has to be the way it is, right? And so, yeah, the question of like, how do you come at it from a designer who has no musical expertise? Remember that you have no musical expertise.
Yeah, staying humble. It's really important. Yeah, no, I mean, yeah, not dictating it is the big thing, because like so much of Until You Fall, even the music, the art, everything else was just like letting people flex their muscles and like show off their expertise. Like there are so many things that are like a surprise and delight. Like I had no idea that the music was going to turn into what it turned into, but Daniel really like helped us kind of take it there and like really added his own like flair with the kind of the dance tracks, or like kind of the dance club feel of it. Like that was definitely not in there originally, but as we kind of continue exploring, it's like, no, yeah, this is basically violent dance clubs that you're hitting people with swords in, and we're totally bought in on that, so let's just lean into it.
I mean, honestly, whenever me and the former one of our general counsel guys, whenever we were first talking about it, I didn't know how big of a fan he was until like we started talking, and we were like, you know what, this kind of just reminds me of like Blade, because yeah, you go to those vampire dance clubs, and stuff is about to go down, so yeah, I mean that's what I Until You Fall, Neon Blade. So
Yeah,
you're
there you go.
you're
Perfect.
welcome.
That's the perfect. So, yeah, I mean, honestly, again, like that is perfect because again, like it is a murderous dance club, and that is
Right.
kind of like what my pitch was over and over again. And so thank you. That's great.
Oh yeah, yeah. Like it's funny. I mean, well, I don't want to say funny. Maybe it's weird. I don't know. But one of my work, yeah, one of my workout playlists, I have like a bunch of soundtrack songs from Blade because it just gets you just so amped up. And whenever I was listening to one, I was like, man, this sounds a lot like some of the songs from Until You Fall. So I think you guys nailed it. So it's good stuff. I'm not gonna go and like beat people up or whatnot, but it's one of those things.
Self-control.
Yeah, so that's right. That's right. But you didn't have RMS, so if you did, maybe, but I don't know. Let's see. So we have a couple more questions I do want to try to get to. So where was it? Smooth Cap. What gave you guys the idea to make I Expect You to Die? Any inspiration or anything? I'll take this. So whenever virtual reality was really starting to become more than a niche, right? Whenever like this could be something mainstream in 2015, early 2016, the studio was trying to figure out how can you make a very comfortable virtual reality experience, but also something very immersive and very fun. And so in the brainstorm, they were thinking, well, how about you be a superhero? It's like, well, that involves flying and going up and down. We don't want to do that in VR. It's like, well, how about if you're a spy? James Bond. You always think of the James Bond movie whenever you're trapped in the car and the poison gas is coming. You have to go through all the different gadgets and you're trying to get out. Get yourself out alive. And they're like, well, what if we constantly put you at that type of situations? So it was two things that the studio was trying to make you feel like you were clever and smart and some type of super ability, but then also how you could make virtual reality a immersive, comfortable experience. So that's how I Expect You to Die really came into fruition. And so I don't know. I think does anybody else have want to back me up or backtrack what I said? I think I did a decent job on describing how I Expect You to Die came into fruition.
I think you nailed it. Yeah, I'm trying. I think there's probably some details. Like, I think there's some prototypes that were made before we kind of settled on the car level. I don't remember. It may have been a Jam Week project, or I think it kind of existed outside of Jam Week potentially, and then the car level was made. And so I think, but that what you described is kind of the general path that the game took. And like as we're trying to figure out what the heck VR is even going to be, like this idea of almost an escape room style experience was kind of something that came up out of it, and then from there someone made a prototype which then turned into the car level, which then turned into the game.
Good stuff. Let's see. Gabriel Reed asks, what is your personal favorite game score? Or we can kind of narrow it too if you have a particular favorite. Yeah, so let's do this. Yeah, what's your particular favorite game score or game song? And then let's go into that question about game music that either you created, you directed, listened to, something that inspired or energized you. So we'll try to wrap it up that way. So particular favorite game, song, or score?
I gotta say that I think my favorite game song is Tifa's theme from Final Fantasy VII. Not only do I think it's an absolutely gorgeous piece of music, but it also has that significance to when I first played the game, like really brought me into it. I think my favorite game scores overall are probably Journey by Austin Wintory. That game score is unbelievable. The first time I heard it, I was absolutely taken to another place. And then pretty much anything by Darren Korb, right? So yeah, you got your Hades, you got your Bastion, all of those things. I love the I don't know, his style is just really it's easy to spot.
Yeah, I was gonna bring up Pyre actually. So Darren Korb is really good. Like I don't know, something about Pyre's soundtrack in particular. Like you're playing this weird spirit basketball, and it just really leans it. Like it just brings you into it. And then also like depending on the team you're playing, the music changes, which is totally rad. And so it's subtle touches like that where I don't know, it feels really good. Also, yeah, Final Fantasy VII, obviously, it's like I don't know, the boss battle music is something that is just like as teenager me or 12. I don't even know how old I was, like 11-year-old me is like, oh, this is the coolest thing. And hearing it like realized as like an orchestral version or just even just like covers other people do, it's just like I will still seek that out and be like, yes, this is my guilty pleasure.
Yeah, I'm a Final Fantasy VII fan of the whole album. So that's been definitely love that. In terms of, I'm also a fan of God of War, the first one. Just that theme song, I love it. Absolutely love it. I'm gonna go give a throwback as well to the Nintendo era. I'm gonna say I'm not really a fan of the game, but the soundtrack, Silver Surfer. When you think about the limitations of that system and how they made that music, I'm just like, they had 4 channels, like a noise, pulse wave, sine wave, and it just sounds like a full charged up rock song. And I'm just like, how did they do that with such limitations? So there's a throwback one for you.
Yeah, the thing that you just made remind me that the original Donkey Kong Country, incredible soundtrack for that. But I think some of my favorite stuff, I love my indies. So Disco Elysium, I think fantastic soundtrack. Red Strings Club, probably nobody heard of. And then Tales from Off-Peak City Volume 1. Probably nobody's heard of that, but like, I think that might be my favorite. It's actually Cosmo D, who was a performer, like a cellist in a band, decided to make games and makes games that like music is kind of the core, like you make pizzas, but instead of making a pizza, it's like an orchestra. So if you put on pepperoni, it's like, a cello or something like that. Incredible. That's my favorite thing, I think.
Cellaroni. Sorry. The actual thing I wanted to say before that just popped in my head and you all get to experience it was Frank, you bring up more retro games. Gunstar Heroes for the Sega Genesis just had a ripping soundtrack. Honestly, anything with the Sega Genesis, like that sound chip was just ridiculous.
It's crazy, yeah.
It's just so dirty. I don't know how else to describe it. It's just this weird wow. It's just so good. But also probably one of my favorite, like this is a licensed song, so I don't know if it really counts, but at the end of Saints Row the Third, when you have to make a fateful decision, they slowly start building in I Need a Hero, and you were racing down the highway and you don't realize that song's playing until you finally have to like choose basically what exit you're going down to, like, are you going to save this person or save this person? And at that point, it's like the full blast of like, I need a hero. And it's just like, oh my God, I'm driving through the city and it's ridiculous. And for whatever reason, that moment is still stuck with me, even though like I haven't played that game in like a decade at least. But yeah, again, like it's so good.
Good stuff. Oh, go ahead, Jared.
I was just going to throw in an honorable mention for the soundtrack to Dear Esther. I don't know who did it. I could probably look that up really quickly to give them some credit here, but that soundtrack, I use it a lot in like Dungeons and Dragons campaigns because it's just this gorgeous background music that really pulls on the emotional strings.
All right. So, Adam, if you can, we didn't get a chance to even play the Neon Nightmare or the opening credits. So if you're able to throw those links into the chat so people can open up tabs or separate windows to take a look at some of the work our awesome team or teams have done. So thank you for doing that if you're able to. So with just some final thoughts, it was that big question. What's of what you mentioned? Is some of that game music the type of music that continues to inspire, delight, or energize you? Like I know Dave with Final Fantasy VII, so I think you may have answered that question already. But for everybody, Dave, you can say it again if you want. What's some other game music scores that continue to inspire, delight you? And then if you've already answered that, you can talk about what's one of the favorite pieces of game music that you yourself have either created, directed, or listened to. So, and why it's your favorite, and what emotion do you think the audience, that you want the audience to feel? So, if you've already answered the delight, inspire, and energize, use the other one of what music you have personally been involved in. Why was it your favorite? So let's start with Frank.
Yeah. So I think I answered the original. So I answered my, I guess, music that I've been involved with. Yeah, I'm definitely proud of just working with the intro song for the second game of I Expect You to Die too. Just because it was just so collaborative. Getting to work with Jared, Bay Area Sound, and just trying to help to collaborate and pull things together. It was just a phenomenal process. I love that. And then in terms of music that I personally created, one of the songs, actually one of the in-level music from I Expected to Die, I'm pretty proud of. It's when you have to, well, I guess everything you're trying to escape from something, but I'm trying not to give away the levels. I don't know if that's secret or not, but one of the pieces in there, I was sharing it with I take keyboard lessons, and my not to geek out too much, but my instructor was like, I use like these jazz chords that were sophisticated. That I didn't really know. It just sounded good. He was like, damn, like you don't really get away with that in mainstream music, but you did a good job of it. So I was like, I never thought about that, but I was proud of it. It worked, and it seemed to fit the bill of the song. And when I shared it with the team, like they were excited. So if the team's excited and they're happy, like I kind of agree. Like I think our role is to make, I want to make like the team happy. Like it's, and if they're happy and they feel it, then I did my job. So they felt it, I felt it. So yeah.
It won't be a secret too much longer, Frank, so hang in there.
First off, I want to go ahead and shout out Jessica Curry is the composer for Dear Esther. So go listen to that soundtrack. It's amazing. I've only ever worked on 2 pieces of music for video games, being the I Expect You to Die 1 theme song, and then Spy and the Liar for the second game. I really enjoyed the process of working on the second one, like Frank said, like going back and forth with Frank. It was funny because the journey of that song came up with the lyrics and the melody. I go to my wife, who is very musically talented, and I say, all right, it sounds like this. So like bum, 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 right? And she goes, okay, well, that's this note, and you can put that in this chord. And I'm like, oh, cool, all right. And so she got to help to like make actual music out of my bum bubba dums, right? And then and then we take it to Frank, and Frank is like, oh yeah, no, I can go even further with this, right? And so like Frank comes back, and it's like started shaping into this awesome song. And so like Frank and I go back and forth a while, and then like it goes over to the orchestration, and like they make something even greater out of it. And so it's like these layers like going on top of one another until it's this amazing full song. And I still have my original recording of me just like going ba da ba 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 da ba ba, right? And I'm like, this is where this began, right? So follow your dreams, everybody. Put your ba ba ba's on recording.
For me, at least in terms of favorite thing that I've worked on, got to go with I Expect You to Die 2. That's just kind of like the most extensive, most interesting thing. I think I'm particularly proud. The second level that you play, won't give up too much beyond that, but I am like really proud of the music written for that. I guess like for me, I thought going into it, it's, we were given this set of like, we're trying to hit these beats, we're trying to hit these emotions. And I was like, I'm going to do that, but really weird. And for some reason it got past everyone. Like, I guess they didn't notice or something like that. But it turned out, I think, really, really well. And I'm really happy that I like took the risks there and kind of went and did all this different stuff. I also like, probably another one of my favorites is actually a thing that Frank wrote, just getting that in game, but that was like a really, really good time as well.
I guess for music that I worked on, so Of Until You Fall, like obviously the whole album just rips. It's great. But in terms of favorite track, I guess from that album, I gotta go with Verdant Wasteland, which is the tier 1 music. I guess it's you hear it a lot, and so you might get sick of it. But to me, it's always like the special place in my heart of like, okay, we're working together to find the track or the style of music. And every time those sweet guitars come in, it's just, I don't know, it's just like, yes, okay, this is so over the top. This is exactly what I was hoping for. This is achieving all of my dreams. I am a badass knight to a weird neon rave. And I guess, yeah, like there's that one. There's also the boss music too, because like in general, like the whole album, and I think that Neon Nightmare and I think Heart of Corruption is the boss music. Both of those songs kind of both exemplify like kind of the different, almost like blends of music we went for. And so again, every track in the game like makes you feel powerful. But I think of those tracks, those are probably two of my favorites.
Good deal.
Which is the tier 2? Which is the tier 2 just regular music?
Neon Nightmare.
Okay, so that's that one. Yeah, that's my favorite.
Yes, that was the one that we were going to play, but yeah, you can probably play. You can listen to it on your own time now. But yeah, no, Neon Nightmare is great.
Yeah.
It's like it's so good. Like I really like it, but I don't know those guitars. I just can't get over it. Again, maybe that's just me wanting a dumb rock song or ska in the game. But hey.
Well, I'm glad you were satisfied, Dave. So thank you, everyone, for joining. So just before we end, please, because we didn't get a chance to play much of the music because of your wonderful questions, listen to the Until You Fall songs on our YouTube channel or wherever you find your music online. The Until You Fall music is everywhere. We literally distribute it everywhere digitally, so wherever you can listen to your music, you can find it. Be sure to check out the Spying the Liar song also on our YouTube channel, and we'll have additional announcements about that as well. Be sure to wishlist I Expect You to Die 2 on Steam and on Oculus. I believe you can wishlist on Oculus, so make sure you do that. The coming soon pages, the pre-sale order or pre-order pages are up as well. It goes live in towards the end of August. So that's awesome. If you haven't already, make sure you subscribe to our YouTube channel, enable your notifications so you can make sure you don't miss another Dinner with the Devs, another trailer of the games that we are creating, and also the August Dinner with the Devs on August 28th, I believe, at 6 p.m. Eastern time, like it was today. The I Expect You to Launch edition. So we'll have the I Expect You to Die 2 directors here and to talk about the launch of the game, the creation of the game, and answer some of your questions. As always, no spoilers. And thank you again for joining us. Julian, Jared, Dave, Frank, thank you so much. Mac was our tech director. Thank you or tech producer. Thank you for making sure our stream went live. Adam, thank you for our live chat. Allie is our post-production producer, or coordinator. Thank you for that. And Jill's our senior director of marketing. So thank you for letting us continue to do this. So thank you for everybody. Have a good night.
Bye, folks.
Everybody, bye.
Take care.